defeat?
I have fought in war since I was 16. I was a volunteer, and I went and fought on and off a few months every year as a volunteer until the war ended 6 years later. It was an 8-year long war, but the first 2 years I was too young to be able to volunteer. When I was 16, I volunteered, and since I was still young, I had to give a sort of exam, or I was interviewed, and I was allowed to go and fight. Um, so if I could go to Gaza, I would go to Gaza. If I could go to Lebanon, I'd go to Lebanon. If I could go to Syria, I'd go to Syria because if it's something I believe in, I'd fight for. And of course, Yemen, the same. But war is horrible. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I hate war. If I have to fight a war, I'll fight a war. But I hate war. Uh, I don't want war, but I believe that the United States would lose a war with Iran. Everyone would lose. I mean, the world would lose. War is horrible, as I said. The war in Ukraine is a loss for Russia, and it's a loss for Ukraine. It's a loss for the West. But the loss for Russia is less than the West, and that's why Russia is winning. Relatively speaking, Russia comes out on top. We predicted that from the very beginning, many of us, you, yourself, me, and some of our friends. But war is still horrible, and it's a loss for everyone. So I don't want war to happen, but it's not something that the Islamic Republic of Iran is going to be fearful of. It does not want war, but if it has to confront the United States, it will confront the United States. And I think we've already seen that. Trump sent a letter which had an implicit threat. The Iranians said, no, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to have direct talks. And the Iranians said, as usual, just as in the past, we are prepared to have indirect talks, which we've always have had with Trump and with previous administrations. Trump, we've heard over the last couple of days in the media that the Trump team or Trump, they're thinking about the Iranian proposal for indirect negotiations. That's not a proposal. The Iranians never proposed that. Iran has said it's willing to continue indirect negotiations. We've already been doing that. So there's nothing new there. But the very fact that they put it this way and they've said it in the media, or they've said it through the media, I think indicates that it is possible that Trump wants an off ramp. He wants the opportunity to de-escalate, at least for now. That may not be true, or it may be true until tonight when he tweets something new, because that's how Trump works. He says one thing, but next day it's something else. This whole tariff saga, we've heard different things. It's been, with Canada, the United States, Mexico, the United States, it keeps changing, and then finally today we got a list that's different, or the percentages are different from what it was going to be earlier, and it may evolve again tomorrow. So Trump is not a very stable person. He's not stable at all. So if we say that he's seeking for an off ramp, that means that he may be seeking for an off ramp today, but not necessarily tomorrow. But that, of course, is one of the reasons why Iran can't negotiate with Trump, because we can't trust anything that he says. If he says he'll agree to something today, he may change his mind tomorrow. Look at what happened in Gaza. The day before he came to power, he negotiated, or his people negotiated a ceasefire. And we were told that his representative went and told Netanyahu to sit down and shut up and do as we say. Remember, it was on a Saturday, and Netanyahu's office supposedly said that he cannot meet anyone today, and so on, and he was forced to do so. But then what happened? We were told he's a man of peace. He wants to end this Holocaust, and then he said Palestinians must leave. The deal that he negotiated, the deal that he is the guarantor, he is saying the Palestinians must leave. That's totally against the deal. And then later on, he gives the green light to Netanyahu to restart the mass slaughter of women and children. So how can we negotiate with Trump? So whether there are two issues here. One is, can Trump defeat Iran, or will Iran defeat the United States? Will the world lose? What will happen? That's one question. The second is, okay, war is tragic, but how can we negotiate with this guy? How can we sit down and talk with him when he changes his mind every day? The United States does that. It's not just him. Uh, you saw, for example, not just the Minsk Accords, but the Istanbul negotiations that could have ended the war 3 years ago, the war in Ukraine. Who pushed Zelensky to quit the talks? It was the previous British Prime Minister, but who was he speaking on behalf of? It was the United States. So negotiations, Minsk Accords, the JCPOA, the United States never fulfilled their side of the bargain when they signed the JCPOA under Obama. It wasn't just Trump who tore up the deal. Obama was violating the deal from day one, even though Iran was fully committed. But Trump is even worse. So the question is, can we even negotiate? I think the answer to that is, at least for now, no. There's no one there's no one in Washington who you can speak with and and you could be sure that what he says matters, or what he says will be carried out. But if there's war, and this is where my friends Scott Ritter and I have a disagreement, because we had a Twitter exchange a few days ago. I think some of our friends probably read them. Like, we had 15, 20 tweets that went back and forth on 2-3 different occasions. Scott was saying basically that Iran should give up its sovereignty, its sovereign right to a nuclear program, because Trump will destroy Iran. And my response was that, first of all, if you accept that logic, then even if Iran gives up its nuclear program, its missile defense capabilities, its allies across the region, why shouldn't Trump go further? He has a nuclear weapon. He can threaten Iran based on Trump's logic, on Scott's logic, and he can have the keys to Tehran. He can go as far as he wants, and then that's what the neocons want. So I don't see that as acceptable. First of all, the Iranians would never allow their sovereignty to be taken away from them. It's part of their religious culture. It's part of their identity. Anyone who knows about Imam Hussein and Karbala, the grandson of the Prophet, anyone who knows how, when the despot of his time, of his era, wanted him to submit, he said, "Hayhat min nadallat," meaning, never to humiliation. That is a key part of our Muslim Iranian Shia identity. Every year, for those who know, when they commemorate Ashura and the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet, it's a slogan that people regularly chant in the religious ceremonies and so on. So it's ideologically, humiliation is not something that they can accept. But as I said, even if they were to say, okay, for the sake of humanity, we will, let's say, relinquish a part of our sovereignty, let's say, hypothetically. With who are you going to trust here? You give up your sovereignty, which is not just your sovereignty, but it's your insurance policy, and you're going to put your faith in Trump. You're going to put your faith in the United States, which is busy carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, which is bombing Yemen, and since it cannot bomb and destroy their military targets, they're destroying the public water reservoirs in Yemen. You want to trust the United States? What fool would do that? Obama did not abide by his own commitments. Why would Trump, of all people, abide by his commitments? So there's no one to negotiate with in Washington. So ideologically speaking, character-wise, it doesn't make sense to us. Practically speaking, it doesn't make sense. And it's our insurance policy. It's our defense capability. If we don't have the ability to defend themselves, the neocons would come in tomorrow. But I don't think the Americans can win that war, a conventional war. Scott Ritter has spoken about nuclear annihilation by basically saying that the United States is so sinister and so evil, which I agree. It is utterly sinister and evil. It has the same murderous culture, but much more hypocrisy. Much more hypocrisy. The West kills, and then they expect you to thank them and to acknowledge their moral superiority. At least Saddam Hussein didn't do that. At least these Zionists and these Nazis and these despots across the world in the past weren't so weren't so arrogant. They just killed. But anyway, if the United States was to use a nuclear weapon, first of all, they cannot prevent Iran from firing hundreds of thousands of missiles and drones from their many underground missile and drone bases across the country. Adds target across the region, and especially Iran's drone capabilities. Remember, the Iranian missiles that were fired at Israel, the Israeli regime, the Israelis couldn't stop them. Nor could the Americans when the Iranians fired at them at the Al-Assad base. But Iranian drones, I mean, they could take out everything in the Persian Gulf region. And there are hundreds of thousands. And they're not, these potential targets are not far away. They're not hundreds of kilometers away. They're very close. So the Americans, they won't be able to stop that. And a war in the Persian Gulf would mean the end of the global economy. And again, this goes back to something that Scott said in one of his Twitter tweets that, America is self-sufficient. No, the American consumer is completely dependent on energy, cheap energy. If the price of oil goes to $500 a barrel, sure, some people are going to get super rich, but the consumer is going to be crushed. Electricity, gasoline, anything that has to do with energy, it will shut down businesses, factories. People won't be able to sustain themselves anymore. It would be ruinous for the world. And then you'd have tens, if not hundreds of millions of people on the move. If Trump and his supporters are unhappy about the number of, as they say, illegals or refugees pouring into the United States from the southern border, imagine what it's going to look like when the global economy collapses. And the same is true with Europe. So it's not a situation that the Americans can win. And the isolation that would come about through a nuclear attack. I mean, just look right now with the tariffs. The world is outraged. You see the Chinese and the Japanese and the Koreans, how they are talking and trying to coordinate with one another. These three countries have very poor relations with each other, but Trump has succeeded to bring them together. Just like Trump has brought Russia and Iran and China together. He's isolating the global majority, or he's isolating the United States from the global majority. So a nuclear weapon would totally destroy any credibility that the United States has. The world would turn against it utterly, but still they would not win. So I don't think this is a winnable war. And based on logic, I don't think there will be a war based on logic. But the United States is not a logical regime. The United States is a very arrogant, emotional, angry regime, and this is not new. It's always been like that. It sees itself as exceptional and superior to the rest of the world. So we can't expect logic and reason. So there's that element too. And the Zionists in the United States, that the Zionist lobby, they are pushing for war. They need war. It's not good for the Israeli regime, war. None of these wars have been. But Netanyahu and his fanatical Zionist supporters, all Zionists are fanatical, but anyway, those very fanatical right wingers with him, they need this war. So they will push for the war, but I'm sure that there are many people in the military in the United States who know that the United States will not win a war against Iran, and they don't want war. And that's where things stand. So at the moment, I think the calculation in Tehran is that there won't be war, but they are preparing for they're preparing themselves as if war is inevitable.
There's B-2 bombers on Diego Garcia, 30% of the U.S. bomber fleet. These have a heavy payload, and the understanding here is that the United States, at least, is threatening to essentially bomb Iran into the Stone Age. However, Iran has its own capabilities that you just outlined, which then leads to the scenario of the nuclear question. Would the United States be able to endure this kind of military quagmire, leading it to maybe press this nuclear button, then leading to nuclear proliferation and the like? Is Iran capable of withstanding and defending itself from what the U.S. is already sending Iran's way?
I think it would be far more than just U.S. influence in the region. I think it would really change the world in a way which would be in a way in which we really can't imagine. And the United States would never recover from it. I think it's just the final red line that would be crossed. And the madness of Christian Zionists who believe that Christ supports genocide. The madness of the people in this cult will no longer be able to carry the United States and the fanatics in power. The world will turn against the United States in a way in which I think is just incomparable to what we have today. But in addition to that, the United States, you actually mentioned a couple of things, a couple of good footnotes actually come out of this. One is the USS Vincent. Do you know anything about the ship? I'm sure you do.
Just a little, but I'll leave it to you.
It was the ship that downed an Iranian airliner, murdering 291 people in the Persian Gulf in 1988, and the United States refused until today to apologize for it. So they murdered 291, I think, people. I think that's the exact number, and they lied about it in the UN Security Council. Back then, Bush, the father, was the vice president. He said, I will never apologize. And I think he went in the UN Security Council and said the airline, it was an Iran Air plane, it was moving towards the Vincent. The pilot was saying, we're going to kill you. It was not in the international corridor. All of these were lies. It was just an ordinary plane flying within the corridor, going to Dubai, carrying ordinary Iranians, and they massacred them. So the USS Vincent has, Iranians have memories of that ship. I think probably if there's war, one of the first ships to be found at the bottom of the Persian Gulf or the Indian Ocean or the Red Sea will be the Vincent. But and we have to keep in mind that Iranian anti-ship missiles, I know that they have a range of at least 2,200 kilometers. 2,200 kilometers. I don't know if it goes more than that. But the United States would be vulnerable in the Red Sea. They would be vulnerable in the Indian Ocean, in the Eastern Mediterranean. Look, they cannot defeat Ansar Allah. They cannot defeat Yemen. They're bombing their water their water assets. They're bombing. They're trying to deprive people of water. Why? Because they can't defeat them militarily. They're striking civilian targets. We all know that. That's how inhumane they are. But it shows that they can't beat them. And Ansarullah is still firing missiles and drones. And that's why the U.S. aircraft carrier is in the north of the Persian Gulf. And that's why they need a second carrier group now, because they're running out of missiles to bring down the drones and missiles. Very expensive drones and missiles, anti-missile missiles. Very expensive. So Ansarullah is firing high-tech but cheap weapons, and the Americans are spending billions of dollars keeping those ships there and firing missiles to bring down these cheap drones. It's not a success, and Iran is infinitely more powerful than Yemen. Iran has been preparing itself for 20 years now. And all of these regimes in the Persian Gulf, they're a bunch of glass palaces. I mean, if the Americans really want to fight against Iran, if I was in the Emirates or Bahrain or Kuwait or Qatar or Saudi, I'd leave now. Because they won't survive. These are just tiny, not even countries. So, and then imagine what would happen to the global economy. So I don't see how the Americans, and if the Americans want to bomb Iran, they're probably going to have to do it from Diego Garcia. And that would be 5,000 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken. It's not easy. And Iran has a very powerful air defense system. Now, the Israelis can pretend that they destroyed it, but if they had destroyed it, they'd be bombing us every day. I mean, it's not as if the Israelis are shy about bombing countries. Go ask the Syrians. Go ask the Gazans, the Palestinians. If they could, they would. So, and B-52s and B-2s are, you know, if one of them are down, then they are big targets. And I don't think it'll be easy to have escorts for them because the distance is so far. It's going to be very difficult for the United States to carry out airstrikes against Iran, in other words. And Iran has good air defense systems, as I said, but more importantly, Iran's offensive capabilities are enormous. And the region, as I said before, is full of glass palaces. That's not going to end well for the United States. It's not going to end well for anyone. So again, I think that Iran has established a balance of terror, but which means that basically in war, everyone loses. Iran does not want war, but Iran has prepared itself in a way in which it would ensure that the Americans would not win. One final point, and that is what Dr. Larijani said a couple of days ago, which is important, and that is that he said on television that if the United States attacks Iran's nuclear facilities, we will develop a nuclear weapon. That was implied earlier by Dr. Kharazi, who is another advisor to the leader. But he didn't say it that way. He said that Iran would, what was it? I keep forgetting. It would change its nuclear posture. That's not what Dr. Larijani said. He said, we'll be forced to make a nuclear weapon. We will make a nuclear weapon. He says we don't want to, and there are reasons for that, but we will, if the United States attacks. One other thing that he said that didn't get noticed that much was that he said we have prepared ourselves for such a scenario, and therefore, if the United States attack the peaceful nuclear program, we won't be set back. Implying that we will be able to make nuclear weapons very swiftly, with or without an attack. Now, how is that the case? That's not for me to say. But he's saying that, rest assured, we will have nuclear weapons. And Iran, of course, has a very formidable missile defense and offensive capabilities. So Iran, and in today's world with AI and with a new technology, you don't have to explode a nuclear weapon or nuclear device to test it. Similarly, with simulations, Simulations today can be done very easily. So for Iran, it's very simple. But Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon for two reasons. One is ideological. Iran is against nuclear weapons. During the Iran-Iraq War, when Saddam Hussein, with Western support, was using chemical weapons against Iranians and his own people, and as you know, I survived two chemical attacks in 1988, mustard gas, and in 1984, a nerve agent. And others didn't survive, and others, there are many who are still dying slowly. It can be a very slow death, a very, very painful death that can go on for decades. But senior officials went to see the leader and said, we should make chemical weapons and we have the capability. And he said, no, it's a horrible weapon. We shouldn't use it. And another interesting point is that while we were these civilized Europeans and these civilized North Americans were giving Saddam Hussein, their buddy, their ally back then, chemical weapons and the political cover to use them and the military intelligence to use them, they were also preventing Iran from purchasing gas masks. That's how the West, that's how civilized they are. So, but Iran did not produce chemical weapons. So when there is a fatwa, they have to take it seriously. In Shia Islam, they have to take it very seriously. It's a moral issue. However, under circumstances, extreme circumstances, that can be reversed. If the nation's existence is at risk, then circumstances change. The second reason why Iran does not want a nuclear weapon is that a nuclear weapon destabilizes the region. You have Central Asia, you have the Caucasus, you have West Asia, you have the subcontinent, you have all these countries in the region, big and small, some of them family dictatorships, some of them unstable. You don't want an incentive for other countries to start developing nuclear weapons. So it's not in Iran's interest to have it. But Iran has that capability. It is a threshold state. Why? Because the Americans have already threatened Iran with nuclear weapons. Hillary Clinton once threatened Iran, a threat that I remember. A previous French, I'm not sure if it was Chirac or if it was anyway, or it was Mitterrand. One of them threatened Iran with a nuclear weapon, indirectly or in a subtle way. And of course, the Israelis are constantly threatening. They just during this Holocaust, a government minister early on threatened the Gazans with a nuclear weapon, and Netanyahu on numerous occasions would go to their nuclear site and make threats to Iran, which basically was clear what he was saying. So being a threshold state gives you that security. And Dr. Larijani says that Iran, if there is an attack, Iran can swiftly make a nuclear. So that is, I think, another incentive for the Americans not to behave stupidly. If they don't want Iran to make a nuclear weapon, then don't fight. Don't do anything stupid. Because Iran doesn't have an interest in having a nuclear weapon itself. Mm-hmm. Now, to those many people are now saying Iran should have a nuclear weapon. Many across the world. You'd be, I know you know, but Iran is very popular nowadays across the world. Despite decades of misinformation and disinformation coming from the West and the region, these Arab dictatorships, they've been promoting sectarianism and racial hatred for many years. Qatar, Saudi, all these different Saudi TV stations, got deeply sectarian, really filthy stuff for many years. And the West, of course, and anti-Iranian. But despite all that, today Iran has become very popular, and people across the world are pushing and saying, or some attacking me and saying, "Why don't you build the weapon?" As if like I'm, as if I'm in charge, or I have not, as if I'm the one who decides what to do with Iran's nuclear program, or others attack me or criticize me or push me to carry out True Promise 3, as if I'm the guy who presses the button. But the point is that a lot of people are looking to Iran now, across the world. It's amazing. It's extraordinary how all decades of anti-Iranian propaganda have just melted away. And anti-resistance, and anti-Hezbollah, and anti-Ansarullah, and anti-Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, and Iraqi popular mobilization, for all that has melted away. Of course, they're still trying. You see these sectarian fanatics who still support ISIS and Al Qaeda, and these people who are getting money from these oil and gas-rich regimes, or from Erdogan or someone, these sort of people, or the West, USAID and NED or whatever's replaced them, that they still do their best to demonize and to antagonize Iran. But there are lots of people who say Iran should have a nuclear weapon, and I think probably now the majority of Iranians believe we should have a nuclear weapon. I haven't seen any of the latest polls, but before it used to be somewhat evenly split. I still believe that where we stand, I think that the position that Dr. Larijani announced is a good one, because I think that nuclear weapons is not a good thing. And if possible, if we don't have them, if we don't need to have them, so much the better. But Iran can do it at whenever it wants. And I think that creates an incentive for the Americans to think twice before being stupid. Although the Americans are still very stupid.